Have you ever wondered how we know what happened thousands of years ago? How do we even know about ancient kings, battles, or strange civilizations that vanished long before cameras or newspapers existed? Well, it all comes down to a very special group of people, the first storytellers, the earliest record keepers, what we call the Pale Historians. These were the people who took the world's stories and memories and found ways to write them down, to preserve them, and to pass them on. Without them, our history would be nothing more than whispers lost in the wind. But who were these Pale Historians? How did they work? And why should we still care about their writings today? In this video, we're going to travel back in time, to when history was just beginning to be recorded. We'll explore the challenges these early historians faced, the stories they told, and the legacy they left behind. So buckle up and get ready, because the story of how history itself was made is one you don't want to miss. Before people could write things down, they still needed to remember their past. But how did they do that? For thousands of years, humans passed stories from one generation to the next through oral traditions, basically telling stories out loud. These stories weren't just for entertainment, they were how people kept their history alive. Imagine sitting around a fire at night. The oldest person in the tribe tells tales about the tribe's ancestors, great hunts, important events, and even lessons about life. These stories were repeated over and over, sometimes in the form of songs or poems, to make sure everyone remembered them clearly. This method of storytelling was powerful. It built strong connections between people and their past, but it also had its limits. Since stories were passed by word of mouth, details could change or be forgotten over time. Sometimes facts mixed with myths and legends became part of the history. Still, oral traditions were the foundation of all history. They preserved culture, beliefs, and important knowledge long before written language existed. Even today, many indigenous communities around the world keep their history alive through oral stories, proving that this ancient way of remembering is still alive and valuable. So, before the first word was ever written down, these oral storytellers were the original historians, keeping the past alive through memory and voice. Before humans could write, history was fragile, stored only in memories and spoken words. But everything changed when writing was invented. Writing gave people a way to capture history permanently. No longer did stories rely on memory alone. They could be recorded, shared, and preserved across generations. The earliest known writing systems appeared around 5,000 years ago. One of the first was cuneiform, created by the Sumerians in Mesopotamia. It started as simple marks on clay tablets, used mainly for trade and keeping records. But soon, people began writing stories, laws, and even historical events. At the same time, ancient Egyptians developed hieroglyphs, a beautiful system of symbols carved into stone and painted on walls. These records told stories of pharaohs, battles, and religious beliefs. Writing didn't spread everywhere at once. Different cultures invented their own systems, like the Chinese characters and early alphabets in the Middle East. But all of these were breakthroughs because they turned history into something tangible. With writing, history shifted from being a story told around the fire to something that could be examined, questioned, and shared widely. This was the moment history truly began, thanks to the invention of writing. Once writing took hold, some people began doing something new. They started to investigate the past. They didn't just write down stories or events. They tried to understand and explain what really happened. One of the most famous early historians is Herodotus, often called the father of history. He lived over 2,400 years ago in ancient Greece. What made Herodotus special was that he didn't just tell myths or legends. He traveled to different places, talked to people, and collected stories to write a big history of the Greco-Persian Wars. Herodotus mixed facts with some storytelling, and sometimes he included myths. But he tried to explain causes and effects, why things happened, not just what happened. That was a huge step forward. Then came Thucydides, another Greek historian who took things even more seriously. He lived around the same time as Herodotus, but focused on the Peloponnesian War. Thucydides insisted on strict facts and eyewitness accounts. He avoided myths and aimed for accuracy. In many ways, his work looks more like modern history than anything before. But early historians weren't just in Greece. In other parts of the world, like China and India, historians were also beginning to record the past. For example, the ancient Chinese historian Sima Qian wrote detailed histories that combined records, interviews, and his own analysis. What all these early historians shared was a new approach. They wanted to understand history, not just tell stories. They asked questions, sought evidence, and tried to separate truth from fiction. This approach laid the foundation for how history is studied today. And it all started with these early pioneers, the Pale Historians. Even though these early historians did amazing work, their job wasn't easy. Recording history back then came with many challenges. First, think about the world they lived in. No planes, no internet, no quick ways to check facts. Traveling to distant places took weeks or months, and sometimes it was dangerous. Getting reliable information was a huge challenge. Second, they had to rely on people's memories and stories, but memories can be tricky. People might exaggerate, forget details, or tell stories that made them look better. Sometimes, historians had to decide which version to believe, and that wasn't always easy. Third, political pressure was a big problem. Many early historians worked for kings or rulers. If a story made a ruler look bad, it might be changed or left out. This created bias in the records. History was sometimes shaped by those in power. Plus, the tools they had were limited. Writing materials like papyrus or clay tablets were fragile and rare. Over time, many early records were lost or destroyed, which means parts of history disappeared forever. Despite these difficulties, these Pale historians kept going. They did their best to tell the stories of their time, even when it was hard to find the truth. Their struggles remind us that history is never perfect. It's always shaped by the people who tell it and the times they live in. So why do the Pale historians still matter? Why should we care about people who lived thousands of years ago and struggled to write down their stories? The answer is simple. They laid the foundation for how we understand history today. Thanks to their efforts, we learned that history isn't just a collection of stories. It's a search for truth. They showed us the importance of asking questions, checking facts, and looking at different viewpoints. Their work taught us to think critically, to be curious, and to never take history at face value. Without them, we wouldn't have the tools to explore the past in a thoughtful way. Even now, modern historians build on their methods, using evidence, verifying sources, and trying to tell the story as accurately as possible. And beyond academics, their legacy reminds us that history is alive. It shapes who we are, where we come from, and how we see the world. So next time you read about history or hear a story from the past, remember the Pale historians, the original detectives of time who helped make it all possible. So, what can we take away from the story of the Pale historians? They were more than just record keepers. They were explorers of the past, curious minds who wanted to understand the world and share it with others. Despite all the challenges they faced, from limited tools to biased rulers, They laid the groundwork for how we study history today. Their stories remind us that history is not just about facts and dates. It's about people, their struggles, their dreams, and their lessons. And it's a story that never really ends, because every day we're adding new chapters. Today, in our digital age, history is everywhere, in videos, books, podcasts, and even on social media. But the responsibility still lies with us to question, learn, and keep the story alive. So, what do you think? How will you remember history? And what story will you add to the world? Thanks for joining me on this journey into the past. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, keep exploring, because history is waiting to be discovered. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell for more. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. See you in the next one. Bye for now.